I took up my pen again to try and write poetry to address some of the social justice issues that I saw happening in the world. And I started writing a bit about my own personal experiences in my career as a pipe fitter. I worked a lot in the oil field and spent a lot of time working in a petrochemical plant outside of Edmonton here. It's a Dow chemical plant. And I found the response to the petropoetics was very good, and I started writing more and more poems about it, and ended up publishing a book called Work of Words, which dealt with a lot of those personal consequences, some of my experiences, actually, work sites and union fight against politics and oligarchies of the oil companies, for instance. Anyways, I do have a selection of poems to read today. A couple are from that book, Work of Words, but the bulk of them are new poems and deal with some of the effects on our environment, on our planet, and some of their cultural effects, and also effects to people who work in those fields.
Yeah.
So this first poem I'd like to read for you is called Addiction, and it reflects on our dependence on oil for so many things, and the neglect somewhat of just continuous extraction and not addressing some of the damage we leave behind. Mm-hmm. So it goes like this. Addiction. The needle slides slowly in as the rig drills deep to draw the blackened blood of ancient marine life from the vein that runs atoms under the crust. Plunging and pulling, penetrating through layers of interred history, the pump jack action continues to suck up the virulent serum from ancient embedded pockets of carbonized primitive life forms. The phyla and the families of ferns, crustaceans, and pre-Cro-Magnon marine organisms transformed through processes of pressure and decay. Today, the buried dry seabeds, reliquefied through eons and epochs, are evacuated again as petroleum is percolated persistently to the surface, free for predatory pipelines. A new sustenance for habitual dependence on oil field opiates and carboniferous derivatives of petrochemical networks. This new phylogenetic process reveals a pockmarked planet which exhibits countless scars and scabs of an addiction to bitumen. So, continuing with more poems around petropoetics. This next poem is dealing a bit more with consequences that are personal or say oil field workers that often suffer exposures to different chemicals, situations, and can suffer long-term effects from it. Sometimes not necessarily right there at work, but later on, as is what has happened to me as a result of being gassed one time. I still have these problems with my lungs sometimes. It's called the turnaround. The off days are often the rough days when the methane in your veins boils and burns the lungs, filtering the grits of the blood, absorbed into, then excreted by aching alveoli, scrubbing the sand from escaping fracking vapor, just like fire in an air-cooled exchanger. Then, regurgitation of gases, pumped for a new geology, mutated from an old anthropology, agitated, by phenols and benzenes, vacates the spaces, repels bitumen from bedrock, and coerces pitch from the brain. In a delimited scheme, refining the dream for a fretless future. From the fern in the forest, from the dune in the desert, from the basin in the ocean, from the patch to the pipeline, and from wellhead to the nozzle, from rig to the grave, light in oil is black and white, but from core to cutis, from heart to the vein, from backbone to the brain, living and dreaming are more beautiful in color. This next poem is from my book, Work of Words, and it talks about some of the things that are left behind, but eventually, as in landmarks for many empires, they too, if left, the earth can recover, but they are still evidence of our misuse. It's called landmarks. Transient, those boundaries in the refinery, ever reclaimed at the perimeter by bears, ravens, choking vegetation, and erosive forces grown of nature. An impermanent emblem is assembled upon a legacy of fossils yields, destined to join the fossilized legacies of pyramids, plantations, and battlefields. Chronically attacked from within and out, there is no security in pretense or chances. Justice threatened, the culture bound therein, there is no sure welfare in unions or pensions. Paraffin wax, coyote track, and clawbacks suggest a retrogressive admixture. Wolves, moguls, wildcats, and plutocrats compromise a convoluted picture. From parameters, but semi-established, with a collective commonly agreed to, comes flight, fight, hide from sight, in a cycle often afflicted with corporate greed too. To pipes and beams see just as blocks, steels, and trenches. Once kings, poles, or boards conflict the systems, collapse and ruin are historical victories. Nature and labor, ethical victims. This next poem I'd like to read is actually one of the latest poems I've written. And in Canada, there's a great deal of reconciliation going on with our Indigenous peoples. And in Northern Alberta, many of the extraction plants in the oil sands are in the boreal forest and traditional lands of the Cree people, the Treaty 8 territories. And one particular plant in the middle of the forest worked there, doesn't seem to fit there, but it is there on top of the tar sands. And it's named after a river that's right next to it called Firebag. I just found it ironic that Firebag also, I mean, as we know, Indigenous people carry a little pouch around for fire starting with implements, moss, etc. And the Firebag in Cree is called Iskatu Maskimot. And so I wrote about that kind of juxtaposition, and there is some Cree language in this poem. I can explain those to you before we start, maybe, just so you know when I get to them what the terms mean. The first term used is Wisakikak, which is a Cree cultural hero and trickster of legends. And as I said, fire bag, or the fire pouch of the Cree people, is Kotu Maskumot. The next term I use is Sakau Pimatisuin, which is referring to a bush way of life, an Indian traditional way of life. The creator to the Cree is called Ise Manitau. And a couple other terms, eagle is Kihiu. Oil is referred to as Pimi in Cree. And you'll also hear me say Owatumawaskik, which is dreamland. And another type of living, or not living, the end of living is known as Poni Pimatisuin. So when you hear those, you'll know what I'm talking about. This poem is called Firebag. Amid hectares of grizzly old jack pines, cutting up through a verdant undergrowth, rituals of nature's relationships determine the design that binds them both. From the wood that Wisakikak made trees and animals he created from bones, the flora and fauna of the forest originated in boreal zones. Centuries of ceremonies constant within ranges of these confines. We find a trust just recently interrupted by a presence through which it's undermined. Like a wavering highway heat mirage, or imagined dreamlike desert delusion, aberration appears surreally to be distant Moneric illusion. Blurred, crenellated turrets tower now, barely distinguished, incongruously over the surrounding waves of woodlands. They loom, unsought and superfluously, the clouds of steam causing shadowy mists, through pluming fumes of flames and vapor trails, laying a hazy cloak of wispy smoke, which now every tree in that forest veils. The periscopic refinery flare stacks of Suncor firebag on the forest fringe erupt effluent processed residues that burn, corrode, and other ways impinge upon the creator's relationships. And, like acts of arsonist instruments, belie contents in the sacred satchel carrying indigenous implements. With Iskatu Maskimot misconstrued and Saka Pimatisuin displaced in narrow pursuit of extracting crude, Isimanitau's spirit is disgraced. A carnage of nature and creation, through spewed emissions and expelled effluent, corollaries of misplaced industry, abstract but truly still unlitty. Here the shield which follow the waterways of the boreal forest surrounding. Nature's beauty is defaced by toxic waste and pollutants constantly compounding, with such consequence when wind gusts swallow the carbon compounds from flared ethylene and carry them indiscriminately to other remote but innocent scenes. Blazing flares of the phantasmal figment suck every soul from the forest spirits and drop them far from there, so far from where the noxious flame destroys all things near it, leaving them to disperse in foreign lands, leaving them to dispel nature's order. Just as Kihiu, the eagle, soars unbound, so does Pimi respect no known border. In this spreading Powatamowaskik, the nightmare intensifies to haunt men, no matter what color, creed, or conduct. It is still Poni Pinatisuin. So I notice as I'm reading these poems, painting kind of a pretty dreadful picture of the oil field industry, which I guess it is in its own way, but it's also provided a good living for me and for many people in Alberta. And as I said, many of the poems I've written are also about that lifestyle. I didn't select too many of them here today, but if I've got time, I've got a couple more poems I'd like to share here with you, though. This is another story, a poem addressing how small minority control all the wealth of the oil industry and of little regard for the consequences of making that money. And it's called We Still Write the Story. We still fill the skies with our fogs of smog, even until the teardrops that respond falling from leaden, charcoal-colored clouds tragically with the planet correspond with similar lifts of chemical mists, despoiling and distorting the features of a desecrated terrestrial face, contaminating too all Earth's creatures dwelling within the uncleanly confines of mountains and forests, shores and oceans infiltrated by phosphates and plastics and permeated with oil-laced oceans. We still fill coffers of capitalists driven to advance their profit margins, who concern themselves not with abatement, nor the influence of hydrocarbons and petrochemicals that propel distress, environmental consequence of pollution, indiscriminate mining, clear cutting, or the future of Earth's evolution. Unlike the vaults of affluent plutocrats, the wealth of nature is exhaustible. The bitter reality is that to continue this course is implausible. We still fill the role of the Earth's landlords, wholly responsible to maintain it. We still fill the role of Earth's stewards, totally accountable to sustain it. We, the artists of the planet's palette, discolor blue skies, green fields, and clear seas with tinctures, undertones, and sullen shades which evolve out of our activities. We, the authors of our Earth's history, determine the climatic conclusion, but still find our ways to gamble with fate and ignore the nature of preclusion. If we still fill our souls with love for creation, how will we fulfill our obligation? So I have one more poem I'd like to share. I had shared poems about my experiences here with Green Mountains in the past. This one is kind of reflective as well on the life of many tradesmen who work in the oil industry and as a consequence have to spend a lot of time away from home and family, living in camps a lot of times. This is a poem from my book, Work of Words as well. It talks about what you miss in your family and your love by being away so much, and what you miss out on if you grow up in that family. It's called Nice Girl. Miss you, I do, with the first breath I take. Each morning, feeling here is a mistake. In my cradling arms, if you could be, baby. If you were here, I'd adhere to you, maybe. Accelerate days if I could, honey. Abbreviate nights for any amount of money. To exchange relived recollection for a living and loving connection. Eliminate miles between us, sugar, and terminate the treadmill camp rigor for delicious wishes and benevolent wants that my longing heart and soul daily haunts. To witness your life and maturation, to share growth and your social education. Dial into, not up, I'd rather, sweetheart. Being with you'd be better than apart. Feel your tender love and admiration instead of recurrent mutual frustration. justify if I could my weekly migration, or rectify if they would the work situation. Sooner than later, hell or high water, I vow not to bow out on you, daughter, to swim free of this solitary swirl before you're no longer my little girl. And that is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here, listening.